Academic sociology relies on a specific vocabulary of blending. Scholars use terms like transculturation, creolization, and hybridity to document the collision of distinct societies. The terminology suggests a natural, equitable exchange. Two distinct cultures meet, the knowledge swirls together, and they produce a balanced result. This consensus has a blind spot. It treats cultural mixing as a neutral chemical reaction, ignoring the power structures that dictated the terms of the exchange. Cultural mixing is often a site of structural extraction. The dominant group absorbs the innovation and the resources, leaving the marginalized group with a lingering historical wound. To accurately map this reality, we must move past neutral observation. We need a strict audit, and accusatory ledger that tracks exactly who took what and who went uncredited. This requires a new theoretical vocabulary. The first framework is Mamelucology, the study of hybrid creations that fuel global progress while their creators are actively erased from the record. The second framework is Virologicology. This audits the psychological toll, the condition where a marginalized group internalizes their own erasure and learns to despise their mixed identity. For decades, we have calmly described how cultures blend. It is time to hold history's power structures accountable for their thefts. Language acts as a fossil record, preserving evidence of uncredited cultural fusions. The Arabic word Mamluk originated in Cairo and Damascus, referring specifically to an owned slave soldier. The word migrated to colonial Brazil, mutating into Mameluco, the label for mixed-race children of European settlers and indigenous Tupi, the interior's uncredited laborers. Then it crossed the Atlantic again, settling in Sicily's local dialect as Mameluco. That word lodged in the Sicilian vocabulary because the region had already absorbed centuries of Arab-Norman integration, visible today in the red-domed architecture of Palermo. In modern Italian, Mameluco has been stripped of its history. Today, it is used exclusively as a derogatory term for a fool or adult. This semantic shift illustrates the core of Mamelucology. The degradation of a word's meaning tracks the dominant culture's habit of devaluing the hybrid's social existence. This habit of devaluation is the mechanism for a much larger historical theft. When a society treats the hybrid as a fool, it creates the psychological clearance to extract their tangible value without offering credit. The accepted narrative of the European Renaissance claims ancient Greek texts flowed directly from the fall of Constantinople into the hands of Florence intellectuals. That narrative bypasses the Toledo wave of the 12th and 13th centuries. Toledo was a site of intense cross-cultural labor, where Muslim and Jewish scholars translated Aristotle and vital scientific texts from Arabic into Latin. This specific transmission of knowledge provided the bedrock for the European Renaissance. Mamelucology functions as a systemic crime. European powers utilized scientific advancement, but structurally erased the credit of the Islamic and Jewish scholars who provided the labor. Mamelucology functions as an overdue historical invoice, highlighting how the foundations of Western progress were built entirely on marginalized, uncredited labor. Mamelucology tracks external theft, but we must also audit its psychological twin, Virologicology. The term refers to the Brazilian complexo de vira-lata, or the mongrel complex, the conviction that a hybrid culture's own creations are inherently inferior. Look at the culinary artifact of chop suey, written with the Chinese characters chop suey. One popular myth describes a clever Chinese cook throwing scraps together to outwit aggressive American miners. The historical reality is much humbler. The dish was actually authentic Thai-Chinese village peasant food, brought over by struggling working-class immigrants. The dominant American culture refused to credit the dish properly. The name was translated and commercially downgraded to mean miscellaneous leftovers. The Thai-Chinese immigrants eventually absorbed this disdain until they viewed their traditional food as cheap scrap and refused to eat it at their own tables. Chop suey sits on the exact seam of this framework. The world refused to credit it, and its own makers learned to despise it. Toledo and chop suey belong to a continuous global pattern of extraction that requires a formal audit. Scholars can use this accountability ledger to map cultural output and wealth against the true uncredited source. Macau's famous Portuguese chicken provides a clear case for the ledger. The dish contains 0 actual Portuguese origins. It is a triangulation of Goan and Cantonese kitchens. The ledger expands to Japan and the origin of Nagasaki's iconic tempura. Tempura traces back to the uncredited remnant of Portuguese missionaries' frying techniques left behind in Japan. We can scale this audit to massive geopolitical wealth. In 1755, a catastrophic earthquake destroyed the city of Lisbon. The city's rapid reconstruction was entirely funded by roughly 800 tons of gold extracted from Brazil. The Mameluco bandeirantes generated the gold, but dominant European powers pocketed the capital and claimed the architectural glory. When you start pulling at these threads, the ledger fills with rows of stolen credit and unpaid historical debt. These two frameworks operate together to map the complete anatomy of cultural fusion. Mamelucology documents the external theft, the ledger of credit unpaid by the dominant culture to the hybrid minority. Viralaticology documents the internal wound, the psychological absorption of shame by the uncredited creators. For modern sociology, concluding that cultures mix is an obsolete and insufficient observation. Maintaining descriptive neutrality in the face of structural extraction is no longer rigorous analysis, it is complicity. The necessary new academic frontier is aggressively auditing this asymmetrical ledger. By adopting these accusatory frameworks, we transition from passive observers of history to active auditors, finally holding global power structures accountable for what they owe.